Hey folks, Darren with Fervent Astronomy. Today I've got something really niche for you. That is the Samyang 10mm f3.5 lens, in this case for Canon EF mount. And this is one of Samyang's non-fisheye, so it's a rectilinear lens, wide-angle lenses, and it's one of their nicer lenses. So they've put a lot of fit and finish into this. As of today, when I'm recording this, there actually should be something to supersede this coming out from Venus, from Laowa, which is, I believe, an autofocusing 10mm f2.8 full frame lens for Sony E mount. And it's also it's autofocuses on some mounts, and it is available, I believe, for things like, or is going to be available if the rumors are true, for things like Canon R and Nikon Z mount in, manual focus or autofocus, depending on how restrictive each brand is. By the time you're watching this, it's entirely possible that it's out already. That being said, when I picked up this lens sometime before the Perseids 2023, this was what I could get in this sort of wide angle view in a relatively fast lens for a full frame mount. And it's interesting, to put it mildly. I used it, actually, I paired it with a Metabone speed booster to boost up that aperture to make it faster and keep that wide field of view, which then, you do have to use an APS-C crop, and that was on Sony cameras. You do lose some optical quality there. I'm not going to sugarcoat it, but at the time, it was the only thing that could do that. And I think it's still technically faster than whatever this Laowa lens that's going to come out. But the thing I was worried about was catching meteors, right? Let's see how this lens does, see if it has a place, and see if it's worth you tracking one down and picking it up. Hey folks, welcome to Lightroom. This is a special one for me. Today we're looking at the Samyang or Samyang. I honestly don't know how to pronounce this company. It's Korean, so it's almost certainly not Samyang, but here we go, the Samyang XP 10mm f3.5 very wide angle lens, in this case for Canon EF mount, and I'm sure every mount on the face of the earth. And this lens, up until the Laowa 10mm f2.8, which was released this past year, was kind of the widest, fastest rectilinear lens that I could find. So this is something that I have been playing around with, combining with a speed booster, which is a focal reducer, which is to say that it takes the image circle of the full frame lens and it compresses it down into the image circle of an APS-C sized lens. And in doing so, it actually concentrates the light that was in that image circle, which increases the effective aperture, basically. So it's a way to speed booster a lens, although you do sacrifice that full frame and you end up going down to a crop sensor sized frame instead. However, you can turn an f3.5 lens into an f2.6 lens. So that's pretty useful. I got a lot of samples here. It's going to be a little bit weird. This lens I've taken out on a couple different occasions. I do have some standard samples here, and then I've got some samples with the speed boosters and whatnot. So we're gonna just jump into it. This one's gonna be a bit hectic because there's a lot to go through here. This lens is nominally 10mm, which is very wide. So it could be good for a lot of nightscape stuff and aurora if you can afford the exposure times, basically, or if you can boost it. I have some shots taken with the A7R Mark V, and that's 60 megapixel camera. A lot of these are going to be tracked at 60 seconds. And I really only did a couple of f-stops because, what's the point in going past f4 for Astro? Then we have tripod mounted shots with the Alpha 1 to give you a look at what star trails might look like, 15-second shots. And then we have the speed boosted shots, which I captured in full frame. So there's going to be vignetting from the lens hood, which I'm going to try and figure out a way to remove the lens hood if I can at some point. It's built in. And then we've got some track shots again with that. Yeah, then tripod, and then a little bit of real world aurora stuff. So first things first, these are too dark to actually do anything with. So I'm going to boost the brightness. We'll be back in a second through the magic of editing. All right, here we go. We're back. Everything's boosted by 2 stops roughly, which is, it turns out, not really enough. So let's see what we're doing here. First of all, let's look at I haven't done the preamble. So all the tracked shots here are tracked with the Fornax Mounts LighTrack II portable star tracker, of which Fervent Astronomy is a vendor, but also Fornax's North American distributor. So if you're interested in getting your hands on one of those, head over to ferventastronomy.com to learn more. The tracked exposures here are 60 seconds. The untracked are typically 15 seconds. The cameras used are all using their respective second base ISO values. These are ISO invariant cameras. Long story short, if I have the A7R Mark V and I shoot a image at ISO 320 and I take the next image and I keep the exposure time the same, I keep the aperture the same, everything else the same, and I just take a second image at ISO 6400, let's say 6400. I bring them both in Lightroom. I can make this photo look exactly the same as the 6400 ISO photo with no tricks, just boosting the exposure. I get the same noise, I get the same shadow detail. With one exception, I actually get better chance of retaining highlights. So for things that might go quite bright in certain instances, like let's say aurora, or maybe some stars or something else in the frame that might be quite bright, you might retain some of those highlights by shooting at the base ISO. If you want to learn more, there's a link in the description. It'll bring you back to ferventastronomy.com, where I've got links to all kinds of resources, including a really nice article on ISO invariance. So that's going to be that for today. That being said, you'll also find all of these samples at the end of that link as well, which you can download and pixel peep to your heart's content. Just remind you, they are my copyrighted works. Please don't distribute them online or otherwise, misrepresent them as your own. Please don't use them as the basis for your own review. I've bought this lens. I've had to put the legwork into getting all these samples. So please use them within the bounds of the personal use of assessing the lens. Please use them in good faith, and I thank you for that. So here we are. We're going to pop into this 15-second exposure taken with the Alpha 1 at f3.5. Very, very dark. Let's zoom into the center here. We can see even at 10 millimeters, we're getting a little bit of star trailing, but it's so underexposed. Even 2 stops boosted, there's nothing really to see here. If you're going to use this lens like this, I would say star trails might be the only practical use. Let's go and look at the similar frame, but a 60-second exposure. This is 60 seconds, and again, it is boosted by 2 stops. Here, we do see there's some vignetting, but honestly, it's not bad. This lens has a really big front element, so I'm not surprised. Something like the new Laowa 10mm f2.8 with its tiny, tiny front element, honestly, I don't know how they did it. Lots of vignetting, unfortunately, just because you need that real estate of glass to get rid of that. Now, I don't think there's any meaningful contrast loss here to talk about. It's a relatively slow lens. Let's take a look at the middle. And here, tiny, tiny bit of fringing chromatic aberration on the stars, but not terrible. I do see there's all these little like a squiggle on the end of some of the stars, and this one looks all messed up. There's probably some camera shake or wind shake here, so don't attribute that to the lens necessarily. Although as we scroll to the corners, you'll see things are stretching out, and this is astigmatism. This is not coma, this is astigmatism. So we usually have 2 types of astigmatism. Tangential, which radiates or has radii from the center to the edge of the frame. So if a star lies on one of those radii, which every star does because they're infinite, you're going to get a stretching along that radii, because especially a wide angle lens can have a lot of trouble focusing all that light onto a pinpoint. That's tangential astigmatism. Sagittal astigmatism has a 90-degree angle at each of those radii. So you will find that you will get sometimes like a T shape or a bird shape or a little fighter jet shape. And in this case, it is fairly underexposed, so I don't see any sagittal astigmatism necessarily. There might be a little bit on this really bright star. Typically, it's something that manifests at brighter apertures and longer exposure times. And as you stop down or things get darker, it's one of the first things to go. So there could be a little bit here. You definitely see that there's something going on, but it's not the worst I've seen by any means. So mostly this is just tangential astigmatism. Not much sagittal to worry about. It is not coma. Coma is chromatic aberration, named after comets, which would take a star and make a bit of a fuzzy tail on one side, make a little wedge shape. And if that tail points to the edge of the frame, it's external coma, to the middle of the frame, internal coma, and all of the stars, all the bright stars will show that. And that is not something we're seeing here. So nothing really to worry about there. I don't really see manifestations of spherical aberration where stars can blow it out, so that's nothing to worry about. As far as field curvature goes, which is the lens's ability to keep things focused across the frame, for example, if things are focused in the center but defocused in the corners, we would say that there's field curvature. I'm not really seeing any. Again, with the underexposure and the astigmatism, if there is any, it's hiding it. Although, well, these stars are stretched out quite long, they're not broad, so they don't really look defocused. So I don't think we're dealing with any field curvature really to speak of anyway. And I have just the 2 f3.5 and f4, right? Not a lot of difference there. I wouldn't shoot at f4. I would shoot this lens wide open, if at all. Let's go to the develop module. I'm going to put the exposure up to, let's see, 3. There, that's a little bit better. That gives us a little more to work with. You can see that there is vignetting here in the corners. It gets quite dark. It's going to get quite noisy and underexposed. And now that I have it boosted, it's maybe a bit of field curvature, like once you get to the corner, but not, like we're talking here, not here, not even here. So I don't think that's a huge deal. Again, this would be good for star trails. Let's see this chromatic aberration. Of course, our little checkbox never works for stars, so we'll use a defringe dropper. Click on that purple and it's gone. Easy peasy. Let's enable profile corrections, and I don't know actually if there's a profile. Unable to locate a matching profile. So without a built-in profile, there's no real knowing what the distortions, if any, are here. Possibly there's going to be some barrel distortion. If you really wanted, you could, I guess, shoot this lens up against a brick wall or something like that and see what the distortions are like, and then make your own essentially home-brewed transformation to correct them, or just not worry about it, which is what I'm going to do. Let's go back to the library here, and we're going to look at now some of these photos that are speed boosted. Now, I might clean up some of these before I upload them as samples, so you might not get all of this mess. So keep that in mind. We're going to look at the tracked speed boosted sample here with the A7R Mark V. And here we're actually getting more of the frame than we otherwise would. Here, of course, we can see a weird shape. This is from the petal hood that's built into the lens. And here in the corners and edges, we see that things are pretty bad. There's a lot of astigmatism happening. Now, keep in mind, we are projecting this through a focal reducer, which is going to have its own optical properties. But this is normally outside of the frame. So this is not typically something you're even supposed to see. But this is showing you that the lens actually projects a larger than full frame image circle, right? And here things are out of focus a little bit. Could be due to the speed booster. It's really hard to say. But if we look in the middle, things look okay. And now we're at f2.6, which is the fastest, widest lens available, I believe, on the market. So there are some aberrations. There's going to be different manifestations of them because we do have that speed booster. But overall, nothing like really terrible compared to what we already saw. The speed booster itself, the lens inside can be adjusted to help get things in focus and at a flatter field. So there's a little bit of wonkiness happening here. I probably could have optimized it if I needed to or wanted to, but for the purposes of this test and for what I would use this for, I think it's kind of beside the point. We're really trying to get this middle section nice and bright relative to what it's like before. Speaking of which, we'll just pop right down here. This is the Aurora in May. This is a 6-second exposure, speed boosted with the Alpha 1, and this is the practical application. So we're looking at Aurora here. We're not trying to get pinpoint stars. And yeah, things I think are quite usable, even though things get mushy in the corners and edges. If I was to crop this in, let's just pop into here. If I'm going to crop this in a little bit like this and turn this into a time lapse, or even just leave it like this, I don't think anyone's going to notice that we've got mush around the edges, right? That's because the Aurora is the subject of the photo. Even more here, it's a bit of a brighter frame. You can see a lot going on. Yeah, I think we're all good. So even though the star is kind of like messed up, I don't think that's the main purpose of this type of lens. This is probably a better practical application. And for a bright Aurora, 6 seconds, f2.6, not bad. ISO 500, folks. We're not crazy over here. So yeah, so that's a little look at one of my quirky setups here. I hope you've enjoyed it, and let's go wrap this up. All right. Well, I have to say I'm glad that someone made this lens, really. It is very well built. It's fully metal. The front element is ginormous, right? It's huge. This lens, especially at the time that it was produced, there's nothing really else like it available. And arguably, it's still compelling in this particular focal length to this day. So whether or not you personally are going to find a use for this lens, hopefully the samples have helped you narrow down whether that's the case. But ultimately, it's not one that I'm sad about getting my hands on. So I hope you've enjoyed this curiosity. I'm Darren. This has been Fervent Astronomy. Thanks so much, and We'll see you in the next one.